Hello, I'm Yvonne Applewhite. I'm a member of the All Nations Ambassador Pathfinder Club, and I work with their TLTs. Today we're going to be learning EDUC 003, Understanding Learning Styles. Let's open with a word of prayer. Father in heaven, we thank you for this opportunity to learn more strategies and tools to equip us in teaching the young people who will be working in the field toward the building of your kingdom. Help us, Lord, to receive the information, embrace it, and be able to implement it as needed. This is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. So as we get started, we're going to be talking about learning styles. And this is something that I'm sure that you've all heard about before. However, we want to take a little bit of a different approach, go deeper in some areas than you may have before, but also keeping it simple at the same time. The objective, primarily, is to gain a better understanding of learning styles, but also to be able to take what we're learning about it and be able to apply it and implement it in the field, so to speak, which is in our own individual Pathfinder clubs. Now, next question is, why is this important? I love the slide because it shows who we deal with on a regular basis in our Pathfinding clubs. And I'm sure you've heard these questions. It's like, why am I here? What do we have to do this for? And sometimes adults will feel that way as well. So when you're thinking about learning styles, it's very, very important, not only for the technical aspects of it, however, looking at what God has for us to learn from it. Now I'm going to ask for some audience participation in looking at and reading some of our scriptural support and why learning styles are important. One thing that's very important to me, I'm not going to read all of them verbatim, but looking at Proverbs 18 verse 15, an intelligent heart acquires knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeks knowledge. So here's an important reason why you want to have a good understanding about learning styles, because when you're going to acquire knowledge, you need to know how you learn best. Because those who have an ear to and who are wise, they will be looking to seek knowledge, and part of that wisdom is understanding learning styles. Another verse that I really liked was Proverbs 10 verse 17, which reads, "Whoever heeds instruction is on the path to life, but he who rejects reproof leads others astray." So it's not only important to have a good understanding of learning styles just for the sake of having the knowledge, but in understanding that when applying it and using it, you are actually having the power to lead someone off the path of getting closer to Christ, or having someone come closer to it, whether it's yourself as an individual or the club and the children who you've been working with. And one of my all-time favorites, I'm going to ask someone else to read it, is Proverbs 1 verse 7.
The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction.
Yes. And just as an example of this, when I think about the fear of the Lord, and it's interesting because my own children have asked me, well, are we supposed to be afraid of God? And it's like, well, no, it's not fear in that respect. It's actually having a level of reverence, of awe, of appreciation, of respect for God and who He is. And that is the beginning of knowledge. The first thing you want to do is get to know God and what He does and how He does it. And that also helps us in our learning styles and our understanding of it, and especially being able to relay whatever information that you're going to be using them for with the young people that you'll be working with. Now there are other scriptures up there, and you take your time to read them and embrace them, but I just wanted you to have a good understanding of why this is important, and also to give you some resources to relay to your young people when they're asking you, why is this important, or what do we have to do this for? Especially if you're working with some of the older young people, such as TLTs, who you will be equipping to teach others along the way as well. So this will come in handy. So we're thinking about learning. There's a lot of words on this screen, but also there's a lot of words and terms when we think about learning. So take your time, just throw some of the terms out. When you're talking about learning, what are we thinking about?
Gaining knowledge.
Gaining knowledge. What else? Rapid fire. Come on, let's get involved.
Improving.
Improving. We want to learn something to go from where we are, acquiring something new, and therefore improving ourselves. What else?
Just to know something I didn't know before.
Know something you didn't know before. I mentioned what are we thinking about learning, but learning is a process of thinking. So thinking in and of itself is a part of learning, taking time to reflect upon the information or the experience that you are encountering or that you're presenting for your young people. And so when we're thinking about learning, I incorporated this into the presentation because you want to get a sense that of the process of learning, and it makes you understand more the importance of knowing what a learning style is and how it functions. Okay? Yes?
I just have a better appreciation of learning. Looking back, I really did not appreciate the opportunities I had of learning in grade school and high school, even in college,
Yes.
that I would have the appreciation now. There was still the appreciation, but it was more of a narrow scope of what my
Yes.
interests were. My high school biology teacher was a wonderful Christian man, and really awoke in me an increase of love for nature,
Yes.
ornithology and botany, and that really, I think, laid a really solid foundation for what I continued as an adult to love.
And I think that's a very excellent point. I have shared those feelings as well, of not necessarily having a full appreciation for the learning opportunities that I had when I was younger. So we as Pathfinder leaders and instructors have an opportunity to open the minds or enlighten the young people who we will be having an impact on, so that they can get a sense or a better sense of that appreciation earlier. But for those who feel that same way, the Bible gives us wonderful examples that it's never too late. As long as we're breathing. I think about Moses. He was 40 years and in his element and, in royalty and power. And he spent another 40 years. So before he even got to do the work.
Unlearning what he had learned
Exactly.
before.
Unlearning some and learning new.
Yeah.
And to go into the opportunity of being the deliverer for God's people at 80 years old. So as long as we're alive, we have an opportunity to learn. Learning is a blessing that's not just for the young. Now looking at learning styles, you know that there are many different styles, there are many different models, where when you're talking about the profession of teaching, it goes in very deep, scientifically, but also professionally, as far as the different models and the research that has been done to help people understand how people receive and process information. For example, there's the format learning styles, where you're talking about you want to engage a person as far as what feelings and what they feel, what they share, what they practice, okay, and also what they perform or what they're actually doing. Then there's David Kolb's model. And here we get into some more technical terminology where you're talking about concrete or experiences in abstract and conceptualization. And so when we're thinking about Pathfinders, I want you to have the mindset of not that we're talking to a 2-year-old, but we're talking to a young person, or we're talking to lay people, other volunteers who have come to want to empower the young people that we're working with. So not to dumb it down, but put it in a level that's relational to more people. So looking at that aspect or that principle, there most of the different learning styles and models still fall into 7 main areas. You have some primary learning styles and some secondary ones. Primary being the audio, visual, and kinesthetic, which is the physical on this slide here. And then also you have the verbal, the solitary, the social, and the logical as your secondary learning styles. But thinking about, again, like I said, young people and lay people who are your volunteers who may not have taken that profession in education, not that they won't be able to understand, but you want to be able to orient them quickly and give them the tools that they need so that they can relay the information that they've come there to do. And especially with a younger person who's teaching others younger than themselves, let's go and look at something that is a little bit more primary and narrow it down, the focus a little bit more, where we get into your visual, where you see it, your auditory, where you're hearing it, and your kinesthetic, where you're actually doing it. And these are the 3 primary learning styles, okay? Now, an understanding of learning styles is needed primarily so that you know who you are, but then also who you're working with. And what I mean by that is, how do you learn? How do you receive information? How do you best process information? And when you're thinking about those who you're working with or who you're trying to relay information to, you want to be considerate and remember the 3 primary learning styles so that when you're disseminating that information, you take the opportunity to cover all 3 of those primary aspects of learning so that you are paying attention and you're able to have confidence that you'll be relaying that information to everyone in the room. Everyone will have an opportunity to learn it because something in your class or in your instruction or in your presentation will touch on and hit and identify with their primary learning style. So, what is your learning style? And here's where our first handout comes in. As you will note, even on this handout, it touches to a couple of the primary learning styles, where you're not necessarily hearing anything from it, but you will notice on your handout that it's colorful. There are some images on there in addition to the words. The text and how it's presented, there are some capitalizations that draws your attention. Then there's regular type text. You're able to manipulate the paper. You're able to take notes on it. So there in of itself are 2 primary learning styles that just by utilizing a handout, well crafted, you give at least those 2 groups of people an opportunity to get the information the best way that they receive it. And by utilizing this, if you were teaching from it, reading it aloud gives the 3rd area. So people have an opportunity to hear it, even though they have the paper, they can hear it, they can take notes, and they're having some visuals, and the words themselves create images in the person's mind as well. But there's colors, there's images, there's vibrancy, and so this is something that I would like for you all to use when you are working with young people especially. And what this handout is a learning style inventory where you can answer some questions which will help you determine what your best learning style is, okay? And why I suggest that you use something of this nature with younger people, like I said, besides the opportunity that it has to touch on several different learning styles, it's not very long. When you look at different resources and different models of types of inventories or assessments for learning styles, some of them can be 20 questions, some of them can be 50 questions, and the different things that you go through, I've seen some that's up to 80 questions, where that may be needed at times. But when you're talking about young people and you want to equip them to be able to utilize the information to teach other people, you don't want to belabor them with a lot of technical terms or issues that they're not really going to use. You're trying to relay the point to them of the primary aspects of it, and so you want to do it in as attractive and engaging way as possible, but also not too long, okay? So, however, what we're going to take some time right now is to do an activity together. And that is to take the time to do one of these inventories. This one is a little bit longer because we are working with adults, and we want you to really get in, answer a few questions so that you can find out and determine what your learning style is. Sometimes the variances of the questions and the number of the questions can help narrow down more specifically what your learning style is. And as adults who are interested in being in the leadership aspect of pathfinding, whether you're teaching young people or you're teaching other adults, having this information about yourself, as we just mentioned, who you are, will be very helpful when you're learning how to deal with who you will be working with. So I'm going to take some time and hand out these handouts, and I'd like for you to go through it. Very quickly, so that we can take the time to learn a little bit deeper as far as our own learning styles. So I'm going to take a break while you fill out this information. Thank you. Hey, Gabby. I'll send you the link. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. That'd be great.
Oh, okay. Oh boy, I look funny. I'm like, hey, Gabby. So yeah, because there was two different types of learning inventories. One was much shorter. Welcome back from the break. What we've just done was taken some time to fill out a learning style inventory or assessment so that you are better equipped with some knowledge of knowing specifically what your learning style is. I'm actually going to take a moment now to hear from you to see what your primary learning style is, and then we're going to go through some information on how people best work with learning styles within their primary learning style with the information from our first handout. This was the one that was colorful, it was short in length, to be used with your young people specifically who are teaching other people, but also your lay personnel who are not trained in the art of teaching or the profession of teaching to be equipped in learning all of the technical jargon. It gives them clear information simply and directly. So I'll start with myself. I am primarily a visual learner, and we'll go into what those mean in a moment. How about some other learners here in the room? Yes?
Pictures confuse me. Maps confuse me. So when people give me directions, they start drawing a map, and I tell them, that is going to confuse me. I need to be right, left, turn here, right, turn there, left. That's it. But they'll still be drawing. And I'm like, this will confuse me. So I am fully almost an auditory learner.
Oh, exactly.
Wow.
Like, and I was a history major, and I would sit in the front, and I'd hear the lecture, and after everybody was like, that was so boring. And I could verbatim almost tell him everything he said. I didn't look at pictures, and I'm reading, I'm like, what did they have all these pictures here for?
And see, directly the opposite for me with directions. Don't tell me left, right, north, or south. I want to know what's on the corner, how many lights, how many houses on this particular side of the street. What is the landmark? What am I going to see while I'm driving? As far as the directions, what sign am I going to see? What number am I going to look for? Because I am primarily visual, while she is primarily auditory, almost 100%. Where even people talking about pictures could annoy her. What about someone else? Do we have?
Interestingly enough, I always considered myself visual because even when I read, it's like I'm sitting here and I see what I read in my mind's eye. And this sort of did share it a little over, I had 32 points with visual, and then interestingly enough, for auditory and tactile, each were 20 points.
Oh, very interesting.
Go figure.
Mm-hmm.
But with directions, yes, tell me north, south, east, west, left, right at the sycamore and stop at the weeping willow, and most people don't even know what those are.
They're trees.
Right.
Yeah.
And they're very
But some people
picturesque and
don't.
beautiful trees.
Yeah,
To stand
but
out,
very,
very
you know,
noticeable.
give me a visual where
Yes.
you want me to go. What do I see when I get ready to turn right?
Right.
What
Do
to
we have
expect.
any tactile, physical, or kinesthetic learners?
Well, I start IVs
That's their
really
primary
good.
one.
I start IVs really good with my eyes closed. That's a good.
Yeah, I'm more
there's-
visual, but my second one is tactile.
Okay. And again, what these inventories do is help you pick out what the primary learning style is. Some people can be very balanced, but generally you will get to the point that you have one that sticks out more than the others. Because as you see, I talk with my hands and I'm moving a lot. I'm also very tactile in the aspect that even though I'm visual, I take notes. Even if I never read the notes again, the process of writing it also helps me to retain the information more. So what we're going to do right now is go through some of the strategies that you want to use for your visual learners, for your auditory learners, and for your tactile learners in any environment that you're in. So starting with the visual learners, you want to make sure that their space that they'll be working in is organized and neat and free of distractions. Because for a visual learner, especially, you know, they catch things out of their peripheral vision, okay? And that can be very distracting and take them off focus. So especially in your Pathfinder group, you're in a classroom, you want your visual learners to be sitting up front. That way they won't be as distracted by people coming in the door or movement that's going on the side, because they'll be right in front. And it's interesting, I did something similar to that automatically, because when I go to church, I like to sit up front. Literally. I don't sit in the first pew.
Row 5, that's
hits in
where I
the
raised
No, I'm
my
actually
two
at
older
row
kids.
3. Row 2 or 3, I'm right there in the front. All I see is the front. I'm not distracted by the people on the side. Sometimes just a little bit, you know, off to the side. That's what, row 2 or row 3, I'm right there. And so there was an instance where a person was like, oh, save me a seat. I'm like, really? Do you want me to save you a seat? Because I sit up front. They were surprised at how up front I like to sit. So for your visual learners, that's very key to help them without having those visual distractions. Also, with your visual learners, as I gave an example with myself, they're like lists, to-do lists. I have a lot of Post-its everywhere. I use Post-its because I'm able to write a note and stick it someplace where I can see it to help me, to remind me or something. But sometimes they can get to be too much, and there's a lot. Does anyone else have another example or would like to pick one off of here for your visual learners before we move on? Something that stands out to you, especially as a visual learner. You can say, yes, this is so me.
I was teaching a class, and I was getting really irritated because this person was sitting up front drawing, and I was like, so finally I went over to them because I really was just trying to not really embarrass them, but to me get them back on focus. And they had drawn what I was lecturing about.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, I was like, what? I mean, they visually drew out what I was talking
Exactly.
about. So I'm thinking they're ignoring me, but they are taking it down in
Yeah.
a picture. That was brilliant to me.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I
So
took a
you
picture
want
of that.
to
I was like,
definitely
this-
keep that in mind, okay?
I think that's
Pardon?
a good part about the journals, the new journals.
Yes.
Is that they can draw the scripture that they've been reading rather than just having to write. I like that drawing part.
Exactly. And I've seen those in some of the Sabbath school lessons as well, like the PowerPoints and some of the older ones. What was mentioned by our distance learner, we have Gabby participating with us online, she mentioned that the new journals for our Pathfinders incorporate opportunities for the people using them to not only write the words, but to actually draw pictures that are significant to them of what they're working on. And as I just shared, I've seen that in our Sabbath school material as well.
Yeah, because actually drawing is a deeper way of learning
Mm-hmm.
than actually talking. Talking is the lowest form of learning.
There you go. So,
It's like,
yes, for our auditory learners, talking is very valuable because they're able to hear the information. And for your auditory learners, You want to make sure that you don't have any auditory distractions. Sometimes music going in the background, your auditory learners may find that quite distracting when they're listening and trying to focus in on what's being done. One thing that would definitely be very annoying for those who know that they're an auditory learner, but when you're thinking about the children that you're working with, you really want to keep the noise or talking down to a minimum, because if they start hearing other people whispering to the side, and talking with their friends, boom, they're lost, they're gone. So you want to make sure you have good management skills of the group that you're working with for care of your auditory learners. Yes.
When I'm in church and a baby starts crying, I literally want to get up and be like, "Get the baby out of church!" I can't hear anything. The baby is so distracting to me. But
Yes.
I always thought I was just irritated. But now it's because I want to hear the sermon.
Right.
And I can't hear the sermon. And I literally want to just get up and scream, "Get the baby out of church!" I don't care. I love babies.
Because
I
it's
love
so
babies.
distracting.
But it's so
However,
distracting.
when you look at our churches, they have accounted for that aspect, because when there's a preacher up front, they incorporate all of these learning styles. If you think about a worship service, wouldn't you say so? Because for that very thing, they have a mother's room where the mothers can sit in a room with their children, allow them a little bit more freedom of movement or even expression when they're upset or in need, so that they're not distracting to the rest of the congregation. And likewise, usually in a large group setting or in a classroom setting, if you have something that's distracting or you need to get up and move or something, those people are usually requested to sit in the back. Not to be negative or isolate them, but just so that they present the least amount of distractions possible when we're considering the different learning styles that are involved. So with our auditory learner, we have that example. When we're looking at this list of what pertains primarily to auditory learners, do we have anything else that stands out to you that's like, oh yes, I can see that? That's what a visual learner would say.
I like when they say speak your answers. Auditory
Yes.
learners have to talk through everything.
Exactly. Now, I don't think I'm 100% balanced. My numbers vary as well. However, I do know that I'm high in auditory more so than tactile at times, because I am one that needs to verbally talk out and process my ideas or things that I'm going to accomplish or to task. I'll think about it, talk it out, and I'll tell people, I'll prepare them to say, I process out loud, so that they're not irritated by the fact that I'm talking to them and I may not need their answer. I'm just processing out loud, and that process of brainstorming and exchanging ideas helps solidify me on the thought process that I'm going through at that time.
And that is not uncommon. I spent it,
For women.
I did a
For
bit
women, yes.
did a bit of teaching, and there are a number of people I've run into.
Yes.
That's not uncommon at all.
Yes, Gabby?
Well, we also need, as instructors, to be sensitive to the fact that some people are auditory, because I'm all three, but on
Yes.
the auditory end, for one, if I'm told something, I need to repeat back to make sure I understood the instructions.
Exactly.
And then for two, I like to ask a lot of questions. And I have a lot of times instructors who got really frustrated with me because I was learning in that way.
Yes.
And it was, no, I need to ask these questions and I need to say it back.
Exactly. And that was one of the things that was picked up on our handout, as far as saying the answer out loud. And especially when we're studying, sometimes reading the key points out loud. For a visual learner or a tactile learner, they may need to write it out. And we're getting to the tactile now, where writing note cards, flashcards, the actual process of writing it helps them do that. And we also know with tactile learners, getting up and having an activity. So that's why I mentioned initially, even with such a handout, you want to make sure that it's something that they can, manipulate. There's space to write notes on there, or space for them to draw. The margins are of a good size so that they can do that as well. So you're being able to address everyone's needs with one simple tool. And you want to be cognizant of the different learning styles in every environment, because what we just had mentioned also was considering the gender differences. Even though women may be visual learners primarily, and I'm not saying this as a group for women, but if you have a woman who's a visual learner, still we're able to speak and talk things out. A lot of times men aren't hearing all of that, or they don't want to, okay? They're very straightforward, bullet points, visually, let me see it, and they're wanting to go do it. So these are some observations of just looking at the differences within gender that you also want to consider. So when you have some children who may seem rambunctious, it may be that they're just more kinesthetic in their learning, more tactile, meaning that they actually need to get up and they need to be involved in the process. Having manipulatives, having things for them to go do, having things for them to write, draw, or color will be very helpful. And so relaying this information to your Pathfinder leaders and instructors will be very, very helpful in you relaying to them and getting an understanding with them of what learning styles are, as well as their importance. So I mentioned a lot of things for tactile learners. Is there anything that stands out to you about tactile learners, or a primary example? Yes, Gabby?
Well, I don't know why this is, but I found that I learned better auditorially, like if I'm listening to an audiobook. I had a hard time because my mind kept getting distracted, but once I started painting, I painted 3 rooms, so that way, because my hands were busy, I found my ears were focused on what I was listening better. And I don't know why that is, but I think that goes along with the tactile thing, right?
That's very interesting, you know, because in a similar situation, it's not with the auditory and the tactile, but with the visual and learning to read. Now, it also may be a process of just learning to read, but I noticed with my son, as with a lot of children, you know, they're looking at the pictures and the images to give them visual cues as to what the words are. But in order to help with certain aspects of the reading process, or the learning to read process, I began to cover up the pictures. And then you see very quickly what words are really known, or which ones they need to practice the art of sounding it out, and, you know, putting those individual sounds and blends and combinations together. And so I look at that in a similar way, to where I'm not wanting to distract him from his primary learning style or from the natural process of him reading, but I want to make sure that he has the skills necessary to figure out the word for when he comes across things later on in life that he doesn't know. He'll have that innately in them. And it's utilizing those different learning styles. So when you think about what your learning style is, and understand that these learning styles are in every situation that you're going to be in life. Like we talked about in a church, we see how the church utilizes these different learning styles in structuring their worship services so that everyone can get it. And nowadays with technology, it's even able to go a little bit further, because they're able to incorporate people from all over the world, because they're able to live stream it. People can just listen to it if they want to, or they can sit and see it as well. Some churches have study guides, or they encourage you to have your Bible so that you're able to manipulate something while you're listening and participating in the sermon.
I always think that is so rude. It's so funny when I read the Bible, and everybody picks up the phone, I'm like, that's quite rude. I'm like, get the book, read it from the book.
Yes. And I'm from that era where I still prefer a book to flip the pages of the book. I really do prefer that. But I also have lent myself to the convenience of technology to have several books in the palm of my hand, where when I'm out and about, I have a library at my fingertips. So likewise, the same for you in your learning situations that you'll be encountering with young people. So moving on, another very, very, very important reason to understand the importance of learning styles is because you want to know how to get the information into people so that they keep it. So if you are attaching yourself or your presentation, the information that you're disseminating, you're making sure that you're covering all the learning styles, then there's very little that you'll have to do to make sure that that information is retained. And we'll talk about some of those things to do in a moment or two. But looking at this learning pyramid, what we're looking at right here is the average rates of retention. And so it's separated into two main sections. One is passive teaching, and the other one is participatory teaching methods. And I hope we all understand that to be things that are passive, meaning they're, more laid back, and participatory are more engaging to get with the audience, okay? Now, in our passive teaching methods, such as a lecture, me standing here before you and just talking to you, if that's the only teaching method, then you can guess that about 5% will be retained. If that's the only thing they're going to do is come to a lecture and sit and listen, only 5% is retained. And we're not talking about your primary auditory learners.
Wait, those are the 5%.
Okay? Now, for people just reading the material themselves, only 10% will be retained, okay? Now, audio and visual, so we have some pictures, and we're listening at the same time, so you're listening to me, but you also have some PowerPoint slides and different images coming in there, then 30% of the information will be retained, because your memory is going to search for, what was that I saw? Or what was that I wrote? What was that I heard? Putting that together, we're looking at 30% when there's audio and visual involved. Now, demonstration, if somebody is actually coming up and showing you how to do something, even though you're not participating within the demonstration to be more tactile with it, just having that combination, you're hearing it and you're seeing it actually being done, then we're looking at 30%. I misspoke a little bit earlier. For your audio visual, that's only 20% retention that you can bank on. For those that are viewing a demonstration, 30% will be retained. Now, moving into our more participatory teaching methods, and we're looking at group discussion, which is also a part of this particular presentation, where we're having examples given out from our audience, and there's an exchange of dialogue going on. You can bank on retaining 50% of that information, or the group that you are instructing. You can be confident that they should obtain or retain at least 50% of that information. Now, for those that put it into practice, now we're looking at 75%. Tell me why we're looking at 75%, another 25% going from group discussion to actual practice. Just from what we've talked about, why is that a significant jump?
Because they're doing it.
Because they themselves are doing it. They've heard it, they see it, and now they're actively doing it as well. They have something to refer back to all at the same time. Because if you have your instructions there with you and you're practicing it, you have that to refer back to, plus your memories of what you saw and what you heard. You've got so many different dynamics going on all at the same time. Now, number one, 90% here on this particular scale, when you're teaching others, similarly to the practice, why do we jump all the way to 90% retention when somebody is actually teaching the material to someone else?
Because you're processing whether you understand what was just taught or what you just learned.
Exactly.
And then you're also troubleshooting how to present it for the other person to understand it, because you might have understood it in a different way.
Yes.
And that works for you, how you processed it and got the information, but when you tell the person couldn't get it like you got it. And so you
Right.
have to think of other ways for them to understand it. So now you're looking at different angles on the same problem and saying, okay, maybe I'll explain it this way and you'll
Yes.
understand it. So now it's deeper for you. Your knowledge is deeper because you've looked at the different angles to present
Exactly.
the same information.
And it's more comprehensive, just like you're saying, because you've received the information in your primary learning style. Now you have the opportunity to not only practice it, But when you're teaching it to others, you have to incorporate all of the learning styles. So you're reinforcing it to yourself at the same time, which puts it into the long-term memory. So usually something that you teach, you're not going to forget.
Ideally, if you're teaching something, you are going to be aware of different styles and different learning preferences. I believe that the 90% retention rate that happens in terms of this learning pyramid happens because you aren't really able to teach somebody else unless you have it yourself, unless you know it.
Yes.
And in doing so, it isn't so much about the others that's being measured, but the fact that as I share something to somebody else, am reiterating it and reinforcing what I already know, and that's why my retention rate goes up.
Exactly.
As I'm looking at percentages, I'm reminded of something a statistics teacher I very much admire and respect told me the very first day of class. He said, if somebody tells you that numbers don't lie, you better question everything else that person's telling you. Because people can manipulate numbers to get them to come out to an end that they want them to say. And as I'm looking at some of the numbers that I have been exposed to, for instance, if somebody's just listening to a lecture, you retain a little bit. If you listen and take notes, write notes,
Yes.
the retention rate goes up. If you listen, take notes, and then share what you have learned with somebody within 24 hours, the retention rate skyrockets.
Shoots up some more,
Okay.
yes.
And I'm thinking, that would be true with a learner with my style. However, somebody that is really very strong on the audio, it would be totally distracting to take notes. I have both a son and a father who are not learners in the traditional sense, and the note-taking would be very foreign to them. So there's going to be some numbers, take into
Right,
account the
definitely,
different learning
the
styles and how
numbers
that
are
would
not
be affected.
concrete. I think the primary principle is that the more learning styles that you add in, the
Incorporate.
more ways to receive and process that information that you incorporate, despite what your primary learning style is,
Yes.
the amount that is increased as far as the actual amount that you will retain.
Absolutely.
And the most main point is that when you take the opportunity to teach it, like you said, you have to know that information, but you also have to consider all the learning styles in order to teach it to other people. And that's where you're going to get the most retention. Even though some of the other learning styles may be distracting to you, you'll be then not taking them in as learning the information, you're taking them in as utilizing them as tools to present the information, and it just reinforces it within yourself, because these are retention rates versus
Yes.
rates of actual learning.
Yes.
Yes.
And I totally agree. When someone is teaching someone else, they're going to be more effective to the people that they're presenting to if they are aware
Yes.
of that.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And that's why this particular subject is so important. And I didn't want a lot of technical jargon, because I want you to understand the basic principles when you are talking about learning styles, so that you know what yours are and what other people's are, to have a complete and holistic picture to your instruction with other people. Okay? So moving on, let's getting into the implementation of it. So when we're talking about utilizing the learning styles that we just learned, as far as knowing what ours are and knowing what all of them are, so that we can present the information, how are we going to apply it? I have some examples here on the screen, but I also want to interact and engage you in this conversation to say, give me some examples of this with your young people in mind. because we're adults learning this information. But when you're thinking about younger people and you're talking to them about how to teach to people who are actually younger than them, how does this work? Some examples that you can think of. First, implementation of these learning styles, of course, what we just talked about, teaching. Somebody actually getting up and showing someone else how to do what they have learned. And what about an example with show and tell? Why is that a good implementation of the understanding of learning styles?
That's the part of sharing. That's the part of knowing what you know and actually teaching others about it.
Exactly. And show and tell, when we're thinking about pathfinding and in a Christian environment, it is just what you said as far as sharing. It's very relational because you're showing somebody not so much as just what you know about, but something that's important to you, something that you like and that's a part of who you are. And you're sharing that with someone else. So you're entering into relationship with them by just an example of show and tell. And we hear that terminology with the very young, but even with your pathfinders, getting them up and say, hey, what did you do? What did you do over the summer break? Or what project did you do in school? Come show us how that works. They're sharing what's important to them that might not be important to somebody else. Then you're empowering them to even teach an honor. We see honors as an implementation here. Honors are very important. Here is built into the structure of pathfinding an opportunity to engage your tactile learners, but also your visual and your auditory learners through the process of earning honors. So they not only learn something new in their primary learning style, they see it in other ways, and then they have the evidence of it on their sash to share with someone else and another opportunity to teach to someone else. We talked about handouts, but one other way that I really want to focus on, even though we're not going to go through all of them, is how did Jesus address these learning styles? So I put parables up here because parables in teaching that way, it hit every learning style. You're telling a story that's very engaging for a lot of people, but especially your auditory learners. And a parable, you're hearing a story, your visual learners are seeing it while it's being heard. And for your tactile learners, if you're not up and doing it, you can imagine you're hearing the story of what's actually being done, because parables are designed to be very relational to things that you can relate to. You understand what I'm saying? So a parable, when you're talking with children, giving them an example through stories and life lessons such as that, an example in a story, it's just a very good way to be able to implement all the learning styles all at once. Yes?
And with the tactiles and parables, he always talked about somebody doing something.
Yes.
Like, you can still tell a passive story that's kind of, but his parables always, there was a man sowing seed.
Right.
And they're like, wow, that looks like, tactile learners could see it. I just think, oh, that's a lot of work.
Exactly. So yes.
Do people grow out of learning styles or learn more other styles of learning? Because I was just looking at the list. You cannot do group discussions or sharing when it's PhD reporting on a dissertation or somebody that's all this advanced learning, higher levels, you don't see them doing stuff.
Well, actually, you may not see some of the tactile aspects, but depending on what their thing is that they're presenting, they do have visuals. They have the group discussion because it's an interaction. Right, as far as the question and answering of, them defending what they've written about. And usually you have, similar to parables, what they've actually done. Because in most research or dissertations, you have the methodology. What did you do to find out this information? You
Yes,
see
but
what
they're
I'm
not
saying?
like little kids or younger people where you
Oh, no.
actually have to demonstrate
Yeah.
or, you know, it's
No,
a
no,
different,
no.
it's a different
Exactly.
level of teaching
Yes.
and learning.
And to answer your question directly, which is, do we grow out of learning styles? I don't think we grow out of them, we move through them, depending upon the situation. So in that environment, you have to know who you are. If you're going to a dissertation defense and you're sitting there, your learning may be a little bit different. So you would have to look at, say for example, if you are very tactile and you wanted to get a deeper understanding what they're doing, you might go home and do some experimentation if you had to report on what you actually heard and listened to. If a dissertation has a lot of PowerPoints and there's a lot of people there and things is moving and going on, an auditory learner may want to record it so that they can listen to it again to get some of the main points. And this is in an example if they had to take the information and report upon it to someone else. But likewise, if you're teaching the information and your primary style is tactile, just like with myself, I'm talking with my hands, I'm constantly moving. It's not my primary style, but it's involved. And it also engages people because they're looking at, what is she saying? Oh, that's really important, because I'm like, hey, when this, then look at that, you know. So it depends upon the environment or the circumstances that you're in, that you move in and out of them. Just like you have a primary one, but we all are still have tactile learning, you know, embrace the tactile learning style, and we learn auditory as well for those of us who are visual learners, because we have them all. It's just that usually one is primary, and one can take a primary role when we're out of that particular element of the one that's traditionally primary for us. Does that answer that?
Mhm.
Okay. Anyone else? Implementation? No. Okay. Well, you have the handouts. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Yes.
That's your last part.
So we have the implementation. I do want to thank you very much. I wanted to take a moment though to ask if there were any questions that you may have about the learning styles and the understanding of them. And if not, we're going to take some time to close out in prayer. Father in heaven, Lord, we thank you so much for this opportunity to learn more about how even you utilize the learning styles to help us to learn the information that we need to help others come to you and for your kingdom building. We ask that as this information goes out, it is empowering and uplifting to others so that they can learn more about themselves and how to help others. We thank you and ask these blessings in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you very much.